Today's guest is an author, researcher, and lecturer from Amsterdam who has written 8 books about the extraterrestrial presence, which he sees as further evidence of the evolution of consciousness and the universal manifestation of life. He has been a lifelong student of the Ageless Wisdom teaching. Let's welcome today's guest, Gerard Aartsen. Welcome, Gerard.
Hello, Adam. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, we had a little bit of a short little conversation prior to this, and much of the stuff of what we're discussing, as I said, seems to be like going down a rabbit hole, and that's looked upon somewhat of as a negative viewpoint on expansion and increasing our levels of consciousness. But as we know, there's a lot of suppression that exists in the present world, which has existed prior, but to some extent, I guess when things get closer to being revealed, then we really feel the suppression, or the people who want to suppress information, we feel a little bit of a tighter clamping on that. You have a background in terms of delving into the subject of UFOs and UAPs, and you've written numerous books on the subject itself. Maybe you can give the audience a little bit of a background on how you came to this particular place of searching this type of information.
Yeah, well, that starts way back, probably no surprise, as it happens in the case of many people. But when I was traveling with 2 friends, I was still 19. And we were traveling, as many young people did at the time, from Amsterdam to India and Nepal, not seeking enlightenment or anything, but just to travel and see the world before you settle into society and start a career or something. One day I had a very profound experience of oneness, the oneness of life. And very, very difficult to put into words. I wrote a long letter to friends at home, trying to explain what I had experienced and how it had changed my view of the world and life, even though it was still very fresh. But it gave me a sense of bliss also, which was quite strange to me, because I had left the Catholic Church, into which I was raised more or less at age 14, so I didn't consider myself religious. I was more of a social activist, and so that was a very strange experience for me. It was very profound, and that actually set me on the path where I think I still am, looking for meaning and well, everything that's out there that I felt connected with, but that I don't see reflected in general media reports, in politics, and everything else that happens when you find your way in society. Several other things happened, and I became involved with the worldwide network of volunteers supporting Benjamin Creme and spreading his information about the coming and in fact the presence of the teacher for the New Age. Many people will be aware that every age, according to the wisdom teachings, is inaugurated by a new teacher. And according to Benjamin Creme, building on the information that was given out first through H.P. Blavatsky in the late 19th century, and later elaborated on through Alexander Bailey in the beginning of the 20th century, first half of the 20th century. Benjamin Creme started his mission in 1974, stating that, or in preparation, trying to prepare the world for the fact that the new teacher, the teacher for the New Age, was about to announce himself. In 1977, he was informed, he received information that the teacher had taken up his center in the modern world, from where he would gradually emerge and become known. As most people will be aware, this worldwide recognition of the teacher by name Maitreya has not yet occurred. Benjamin Creme has passed away in 2016. Apparently, the teacher and his group of masters of wisdom, as they are called, say the members of the spiritual kingdom up from the human kingdom, never infringe our free will. So when it was found that humanity was not responsive enough yet, not sufficiently responsive for the message that the teacher and his group of masters of wisdom are about to release to the world, it was decided that his emergence would be postponed until such time that humanity will be responsive enough. And I personally think that's a matter of, in the current circumstances, the crisis in the world, that is building through climate change, through pandemics, through political systems failing, financial systems failing. When that crisis becomes urgent enough for enough people to pay attention, then I believe Benjamin Creme's information will be shown to have been correct, except a bit later than he and those. Ever since that experience in India in December 1977, I became interested in what you mentioned already, the Ageless Wisdom teachings. I started reading, I started studying. I found the books of Blavatsky and Alice Bailey, and I was involved with the books that Benjamin Creme put out. Through these teachings, the Ageless Wisdom teachings, I also became familiar with the books by George Adamski and other contactees of the 1950s. It is not a coincidence that in the 1950s, the frequency of sightings of UFOs, well, in fact, there have been sightings, throughout human history, but especially since at the end of the Second World War, we have the reports of the Foo Fighters, that neither the Allies nor the Axis powers knew what they were. And then in 1947, we had the crash at Roswell that was immediately denied after it was first reported by the military. Then it was denied and covered up with a weather balloon. And we had the sightings of Kenneth Arnold over Washington State. And then in the 1950s, increasing number of reports of sightings of UFOs, especially in the United States, but certainly not limited to the States. Also, all other countries in the world, really. There were many of the contactees became quite well known. Truman Bethlehem, Daniel Fry, Buck Nelson, Howard Menger, but most of all George Adamski, because he was the first to come out with his claim, his account of meeting an occupant of a flying saucer that had landed. And especially in his second book about his experiences with flying saucers inside spaceships, came out in 1955, 2 years before I was born. But I read it, of course, later on. The teachings that he received through his contacts are almost one-on-one with the Ageless Wisdom teachings that I've been studying. And then at one point, I found out that what at the time was thought was his first book of teachings is titled Wisdom of the Masters of the Far East, published in 1936. And then I had this direct link between the teachings that I sort of grew up with, and this field of interest that was developing in me, in UFOs. So the link that I found, that's how I became, how I came to write about especially UFOs and contactees, more the contactees and the message that they were asked to bring to the world.
Yeah. How is Adamski's work related to some of the military findings and the scientific findings? I know you mentioned about Israel, the Israeli government, and some of the information that they revealed recently, or the head of the Defense Department, I believe you spoke about. Maybe you could just elaborate a little bit on how his work goes hand in hand with some of the philosophers and scientists and military findings.
Well, yeah, that's interesting actually, because that's exactly the angle that I take in my latest book, the Adamski book of UFO UAP disclosure. Many people will be aware that disclosure activists since the 1990s have been pressing the US government, especially, but also in the UK and elsewhere, to release the information that they have about extraterrestrial craft and encounters. And these people did a great job in keeping the subject of flying saucers or UFOs, as they were then called, in the public, public awareness. Even though the media, there were hardly any media reporting seriously about it. But in my latest book, what I did was take the recent confirmations and contrast, or rather correlate these with the early evidence and answers provided by especially George Adamski, and the example that you referred to concerns the Israeli head, or former head of the Israeli space program, and also well, he was involved with the secret agency, or no, a professor of astrophysics, and the head of the space program. He stated in December, in an interview in the Israeli press, the Jewish press, the title of the newspaper, in December 2021, that extraterrestrials are here, but they've asked not to make it public yet, because humanity is not yet ready. And that, of course, is quite remarkable to come from such a renowned scientist. And the point I'm making in my book is that not only that Adamski, who was mistaken for a scientist, he never claimed to be a scientist, even though he was an amateur astronomer. And because his residence was on Palomar Mountain, where since 1949 the Hale telescope in the Palomar Observatory had been operating. And people assumed, especially journalists, assumed that he was a scientist and he was connected with the observatory, but he had his own private observatory. And of course, Adamski became known for his claims of not only sighting craft, but also photographing them and being contacted by occupants, which is a very, very interesting historical reference to what the Israeli professor said in 2021. But there had been other scientists before Chaim Eshed, the Israeli professor, also in recent times. In 2009, for instance, there was this Bulgarian, he was also an astrophysicist, I believe, or an astronomer, Filipov, Lechazar Filipov. My Hungarian is non-existent, so I'm probably pronouncing his name incorrectly, but Lechazar Filipov said very much the same thing as in 2009, in an interview with the Telegraph, the London Telegraph, as Jaime Shed did in 2021. There have been other scientists too who've gone on the record and have then been duly ridiculed by their academic peers for speaking out. But it's remarkable, I think, that we now find these voices from the academe, from scientific circles, stating almost the exact same thing as the contactees, and especially George Adamski did in the 1950s.
What was some of the specific information that George Adamski received from his contactee?
The main message that he received was that, we must remember this was in the 1950s, in the midst of the Cold War, when the nuclear arsenals were being built like mad. Both the United States and its allies and the Soviet Union and its satellites were involved in a race to build the most destructive weapons that they reckoned would deter their adversaries from attacking. It was at this time that the visitors from space urged their contactees, George Adamski first and foremost, but also the others that I mentioned, and also people in Italy and South America, to inform humanity that we were on a path to self-destruction, and that it was of the utmost importance to seek international cooperation to bring to an end this weapons race, which of course is a colossal waste of resources. That if we would manage to resolve our differences by meeting at the negotiation table rather than meeting in the battlefield and eventually destroying the planet, we would face a brilliant future. And I think it is not a coincidence, and I was referring to that just a minute ago, that this happened in a time running up to the present time, where, according to the Ageless Wisdom teachings, we should expect the emergence of the teacher, a world teacher for the new age. And it should also be remembered that this return of a teacher is not an invention of Madame Blavatsky or Benjamin Creme or anyone in New Age circles. It's not something that is necessarily was first thought up in Ageless Wisdom teachings. It is an integral part of human history, and when you look at the world religions, you will see that in every major world religion there's the same expectation of a new teacher who will bring a new revelation about the nature of reality and how to reconnect our individual consciousness with the source of consciousness. And this reconnecting, which we see reflected in the word religare, the original Latin for religion, religare, to reconnect. The Jews are waiting for the Messiah. The Christians are waiting for the second coming. The Buddhists are waiting for the fifth Buddha, Maitreya Buddha. The Hindus are waiting for the 10th incarnation of Vishnu, Kalki Avatar. And there's sections in Islam that are waiting for the return of the 12th Mahdi, who disappeared, or Muntazar. So it's a very universal expectation. Of course, the details, the particulars differ, because many of these teachings date from before written history, it's details get in the way, dogma gets in the way, but according to the teachings, which is according to Benjamin Creme, and I believe so myself, can be found at the heart of every religion. Religions are built around the teaching that a teacher brings the teaching is not meant as a religion, and teachers are not meant to be venerated or worshipped, but that happens over time as a matter of course, so to speak, when people begin to organize, especially after the teacher disappears, dies, or retreats, when people start to organize what should be organic. And of course, in the past, people needed leaders, and these leaders were only human. So, they did what they thought was best, and they set up these dogmas and these structures and etc. So the teachings have been lost sight of for the main part, but the teaching itself revolves around the new revelation about the nature of reality and the nature of God, so to speak, in religious terms. And that in order to really live the teachings, we should put them into practice by following the golden rule. And this golden rule can also be found in every major world religion. Treat another the same way you yourself want to be treated. It can be found in every religion. And this is another part of the message that the contactees were given in the 1950s. It's a matter of survival for the human race, that we come together, that we seek international cooperation, that we do not blow each other to bits, and we keep the planet intact, that we take care of the planet and take care of each other. And it's also interesting that we see this reflected in humanity's highest aspirations. For instance, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 25, stipulates that every human being, just by being born into the human kingdom, has a right to sufficient food for themselves and their children, sufficient housing, education, healthcare. That's a basic human right. So you see how the world, how humanity, the way our societies are organized at the moment are sadly failing in that respect. And from that failure arises a major risk to our survival.
Yeah, it's interesting, the concept of, as you mentioned before, the subject of the nuclear bombs going off in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in terms of, and the work being done in Area 51 in Nevada. I'm sure there were more sightings, as you mentioned, at this particular time, due to the fact that the universe itself was in jeopardy of feeling the effects, and many extraterrestrials then visited the planet. Obviously, we're facing somewhat of a dilemma today of, countries posing threats of probably nuclear potential at one another, and the availability of people entering the universe and sending messages that relate to this. I mean, I've heard, or I've seen, seen shows where they show that specific UFOs have made contact and removed the nuclear head, or at least put it out of service when it was in the specific military bases. And there were so many accounts of different military people speaking about this. You mentioned the coming of this person. Is this in the form of a human being, in the form of a mixed universal entity? Was it mentioned what the person is, what the values would be that they would spread on a deeper level?
Yes, it's. I would distinguish between a person and an individual. A person, again, harking back to the original Latin, persona, derives from the mask that actors in ancient Rome used to portray a certain character. And person in our sense of our use of the word really refers to the face, the body, the thing that you see in the mirror when we look in the mirror. But that's not our real self. That's only a temporary reflection, this incarnation of our higher self, our true self, and the manifestation of the world teacher will be in the form of an individual. He doesn't need necessarily a personality. He is you could say, a divine incarnation, in the sense that he has created his own body, which will look no different than yours or mine, totally human, but it has been built to be able to manifest a sufficient part of his very, very highly evolved consciousness, to an extent that it will be able to convince humanity that this is not an ordinary human, but rather our eldest brother, in Christian terms, the Christ, or the fifth Buddha, etc., depending on your particular religious affiliation, or perhaps no religious affiliation at all, but very, very highly evolved human being, former human being, I should say. These, as I mentioned, these masters of wisdom have reached the end of the path of evolution on this planet, and when that happens, after the fifth initiation, they either go on to a higher path of initiation elsewhere in the universe, or a certain number stay behind to oversee and guide and inspire humanity, which is still large numbers of humanity haven't reached that point yet. And our eldest brother, the world teacher, is the head of that group of advanced beings who've stayed behind. And he's very, very much human in form, very recognizable, and at the same time able to do things that nobody else can do. And his body of manifestation is self-created. He created that in the years before 1977, and it is indestructible. Many people have asked Benjamin Creme over the years, well, won't the same thing happen to the teacher when he emerges as did to Jesus in Palestine 2,000 years ago? But this body is indestructible and will remain in the world for the duration of the age of Aquarius, which is roughly 2,150 years. So that is only one of the characteristics of this individual that will eventually convince humanity that this is indeed the teacher for the new age. And his message, according to Benjamin Creme, he will announce himself, declare himself to the world on what has become known through Benjamin Creme's message as the Day of Declaration, on which the world teacher will present his credentials to the world through the global linking of all the networks, satellites, internet, etc. And at that time, he will, when he appears on our screens, he will overshadow all of humanity, everyone over 14 years of age. Below 14 years of age, the bodies have not reached enough maturity to withstand the enormous spiritual stimulus that will go out during that event. And he will overshadow and mentally link up with every member of the human race, as he telepathically conveys his message. That means that everyone will hear him in their own language. So you will hear him in English, I will hear him in Dutch, Russians will hear him in Russian, and Japanese will hear him in Japanese, etc., etc. he will probably, introduce himself, give a quick rundown of his origins, which are the same as our origins. So he will give a quick look at the, the spiritual journey that we are all involved in. Some are farther ahead of us than we are, and he will give the same message that I just referred to, that we need to come together as one human race, human family. And as a human family, we should not have just, say, 2 members sitting on one side of the table, keeping everything to ourselves, while 5 other members of the same family are waiting and begging for crumbs that may be left over. To put the situation of human family on a planetary scale in perspective. So, and at the same time, as he gives that message, the energy of love, of which he is the embodiment on our planet, the Christ consciousness, will flow out from him in such strength that, according to Benjamin Creme, people will feel it physically, as if he embraces us. And in those, and at the same time, hundreds of thousands of miraculous healings will take place. Yeah. And in those 3 ways, people will know that this person, this individual, is the world teacher by name. His personal name is Maitreya, which the Buddhists had correct in their teaching. And again, you see how that aligns so much, so directly with the message given to the contactees in the 1950s, and also several contactees after the 1950s.
Yeah, it's the concept of good outdoing bad or evil, and also, you speak about the uniting of the world with the concept of love. And yet there's a false sense of uniting the world in different venues, such as economics and political and social credit systems, and whatever the New World Order is trying to implement to give us a false sense of as one, or as unity, as opposed to individuality. I guess the individuality is important for us to develop as long as we're following the concept of loving thy neighbor and the principles of what life has given us initially when we were born, or passed through the centuries. I've heard people speak about different alien races being good and some races being bad. Was this ever mentioned by Adamski, or your own personal intake on this subject?
Well, it's not so much about being good or bad. It's about their stage in evolution. We are on our planet, humanity is sort of midway in terms of human evolution, and human evolution exists on every planet, every inhabited planet. So there are planets where humanity on that planet has not reached the same point where we are at, even though they may have achieved space travel. There are several planets, many planets in our solar system, where humanity has advanced beyond our present stage in evolution. So, evil is really the absence of a certain level of evolution and attachment to the material side of life, and the absence of the spiritual notions that inform reality, that inform life. You just mentioned the New World Order. I'm not really sure what that is supposed to be, because there are several power factions in the world, the economic elite, the financial elite, and they're not really one. I don't think they are one organization. They are small groups of people with too much power, who are, who stand to lose that power when they lose, the humanity's belief in itself as being separate individuals. Yes, we are individuals. Over the past 2,000 years, the characteristics, the qualities of the past 2,000 years that we have acquired as a human race are individuality and idealism. We find this in, as the core qualities of the past age in the stories of Jesus of Nazareth, where he challenges the religious leaders of his time, and challenges their authority, and through that teaches people that, that they have, they should think for themselves, and his willingness to die for his belief, and the willingness of his disciples and many of their followers to die for their belief, sowed the seed for idealism. Now, this idealism, we saw the climax, a preliminary climax in the global struggle between capitalism and communism in the 1950s. At the moment, of course, the communist system collapsed. The capitalist system has failed humanity in equal measure, because we live in a system, and this is supposedly the capitalist system, where 50 million people live in slavery. Well, if that is the freedom of capitalism, it's not freedom, because we depend on the bondage of 50 million people for our freedom. That's not freedom, when you depend on something. Freedom and justice need to go hand in hand. Global or climate change, pollution, global inequality, slavery on the scale that I just outlined. These are global problems, and we can only solve them when we come together through institutions like the United Nations, for instance. We have to work, we have to cooperate, not only as individuals in our neighborhood, in our communities, but also in the community of nations. And we have to be realistic about that. There's no way one single country can solve a problem like climate crisis. So, with the collapse of communism, many people will say, well, capitalism clearly has won. It's come on top, and that's the best system that we that we came up with, that humanity's come up with. But it isn't, because it's been replaced really by individualism, and which is another ism, and it sort of holds that you take for yourself whatever you can. It's an extreme kind of selfishness, and that is exactly the way that the power elites, those who are in economic power, more than those in political power, by the way, I believe, try to keep humanity enthralled and under control. It's that sense of separation and the need for competition that arises from that sense of separation. Oh, I have to compete for my place under the sun. I have to compete for a better place to live, or for a house with a swimming pool, or for a second car, or whatever. That's what keeps this system in place. But the system is killing the planet, and the system is killing people. And that is what we need to realize. And that is also the message of the space visitors. It's the message of the Masters of Wisdom and the World Teacher. And it's already enshrined in our, as I mentioned, in our highest aspirations. It's already enshrined in the golden rule in every world religion. And it's about time now that we change our mindset from the crystallized qualities of the past age, because we shouldn't lose our individuality. When we talk about unity or oneness, it's not about giving up individuality. On the contrary, unity in diversity is only meaningful if unity comes out of diversity. If everyone contributes their individual qualities, backgrounds, talents to the greater good. Only then, something will blossom that is more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
So the characteristics, the qualities for the new age, the age of Aquarius, are synthesis and unity, and synthesis from the largest possible diversity, the largest palette of colors and talents to build a new world. Unity is not the same as uniformity. On the contrary, it's that I think that we need to realize when we talk about things like fear-inducing things like the New World Order. The New World Order is something that we live in. It's nothing new about the New World Order.
Right.
It's the old world order, and we need to break out of that. It's not about some threat looming from some shady institutions. We've already been living in that reality, unfortunately, at least for the past 70 years, with the rise of the military-industrial complex.
Well,
and that's.
Yeah, I was going to say
Go
that
ahead.
I was going to say that the resistance that we face in life is sometimes what really shapes us to dive deeper into, to experiment, to finding these types of things, and to actually, rather than victimizing ourselves, to actually push us forward to then develop our own individuality, our own inner strength, and our ability to look beyond what we're told in the news, in the media, in Hollywood, and so on and so forth. And I think a person like yourself who shares this information and people who are interested in this have gone through some type of, maybe not struggle, but some type of inner work, which forces a person to then expand their own consciousness. I know for myself, having experienced certain traumas, which led me to do certain things of healing. And as I mentioned earlier to you about the Akashic Records, and we mentioned not Edgar Cayce, we mentioned Irvin Laszlo. I think that each evolution evolves itself to a higher level of consciousness and thinking beyond what exists in just this earthly plane. Did you ever have, I know I've had experiences where I've seen certain things as well and had experience. Have you ever had any, not contact, but have you seen a UFO? Have you had an experience in such?
I've seen, I've seen the lights in the sky, that could not be explained by anything terrestrial, anything familiar.
Right.
But I think many people have seen those. One remarkable sighting that I will never forget was a few years after my experience of oneness in India. I went back to Nepal, which was my favorite destination at the time. I think it was 1980 or 1981. And it was early in the morning, and it was a clear sky, and there's beautiful surroundings with the huge Himalayan snow-capped mountains in the background, and rather rural area, beautiful. And I was sitting outside my room, and I could see the sun. And then at one point, I saw the sun come apart, and there was another sun. And the second sun started moving away from the real sun, the original sun, because the sun doesn't move that fast. I know that much. And it was the same size, the same color, and it moved away, and farther and farther away. And then at one point it shut off and it disappeared.
Wow.
And at the time, I didn't realize it might have been a UFO. But later on, I saw reports, for instance, from Taiwan, maybe 10 years ago or something, where there was even a photo of a similar sighting in Taiwan, a photo in the press of what they call the double sun. identical to the experience that I had in 1980 or
Yeah,
81.
I wanted to just add something to that because it's very interesting. It lends itself to the same thing you just discussed. I had a dream maybe about a month ago, and it was of two moons or two suns that I was looking at with people in the dream. And I said, look up there. And then the one moon turned into two moons, or it could have been two suns. And then a ship came out overhead in the dream and made a communication, with me as it passed. And it appeared that was something similar to looking up and seeing two spheres or two moons or two suns.
Hmm,
Very interesting.
interesting.
Yes, absolutely. Um, you know, many people I speak to who are not are interested, but just are in a place of like it's a novice type of subject for them. So I always tell them to watch this or to look at that. So, for example, the first interesting thing that I saw was I was in New Hampshire, and in New Hampshire, I was on vacation, and I felt in that particular place that there was some type of event that took place, and I had looked it up on the computer, and it was the Betty and Barney Hill abduction right in that town of where I was staying. And there was a plaque outside that was put out by the Chamber of Commerce from New Hampshire that in this particular place, Betty and Barney Hill. So I investigated further and I delved deeper into it. And then it was Project Blue Book. Uh, is there a specific entry point that you tell people who are interested in the subject where to start off?
Well, it depends. If you're interested in the spiritual aspect, and which I personally think is the most important aspect of the whole UFO phenomenon,
Right.
I would recommend reading George Adamski's Inside the Spaceships or Inside the Flying Saucers. It's been republished several times. It's easy to find secondhand, not expensive at all. And I remember that for me was a very profound source of information about the purpose of the visitors coming here. If you're interested more in the disclosure aspect and the reality of how much of what is being claimed has been confirmed so far, yeah, I mean, that's I would really recommend my latest book, the Adamski book of UFO UAP disclosure, because apart from the example that I mentioned earlier, I have 6 other examples, including, for instance, the nuclear warnings that they gave to Adamski even at his first meeting in the desert in November 1952. And compare it with the press conference in 2010 by Robert Hastings that you referred to, with 7 former U.S. military people who were based at U.S. nuclear facilities where the nuclear devices were shut down when UFOs were sighted. And so I have 5 or 6 fundamental issues relating to the UFO phenomenon that have now been confirmed and that were already witnessed in the 1950s by George Adamski. If people are interested in the social aspect and the individual, what they can do individually, Irvin Laszlo earlier this year published a new book called The Upshift, which is not a big book, and it's very, gives a very beautiful, concise overview of where we stand in the world in terms of all the issues that we discussed, and what we individually can do with that knowledge, and how we can make a difference in the world. If you're interested in to know more about the world teacher, I would recommend to look up the books by Benjamin Creme, which can also be found on the online on the the online bookshops.
Yeah.
Like the other titles that I mentioned.
Your book, the Adamski book of UFO / UAP, is where can people get that book?
It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the major online booksellers.
Yeah. What's the most positive message that we can really get from the UFO experience?
Um, the most positive message is, I think, that we um, we are not alone. We are not going through this by ourselves. The pain and the suffering that we may experience, we inflict on ourselves by not realizing that we are all connected. Life is one, and we now must learn to live as one before we, destroy ourselves. And we have so much help um, available if we only realize it. We just need to take the first step. And we have help from our elder brothers, the Masters of Wisdom, and headed by the world teacher, um, as the spiritual kingdom on our planet. And they are our elder brothers. And we have help from the space brothers, who are here in larger numbers than ever, keeping the planet intact, dredging the atmosphere from nuclear pollution and other pollutions. And yes, there are extraterrestrial beings on planets that are less evolved than we are, but they have been kept out of the sphere of influence on our planet for the time being, because this is such a momentous time of transition for humanity, and in this time of human history. They have been here before, yes, but they are not allowed to come here now and influence, bring their negative influence on humanity. We are our own greatest enemy at the moment, and we don't need any stimulus in that respect from outer space. So there's a ring of light. Wilbert Smith, the well-known Canadian researcher and contactee from the late 1950s, early 1960s, was told there's this protective boundary. The US scientist Michael Wolff, who wrote The Catches of Heaven, was told the same thing. And Benjamin Creme was given the same information by his master. So we don't have to fear any kind of alien invasion or anything. We have help from all quarters, and we now need to take responsibility and pull our own weight as individuals, and then bring other people together to make a difference, to make a change.
Yeah, that's insightful. It's as we were discussing before, just in terms of our own personal journey of making that first step of actually understanding ourselves, and then better
Exactly.
understanding humanity and what else lies beyond. If you could just leave us with a positive message, either it relates to what you've just told me or something that you want to elaborate for something on an individual level.
Well, there's a brilliant future ahead of us. And the time that we're going through now, that seems so scary and laden with threats and dangers from all sides. I think it's because it's a time of transition. So all the systems are failing, are crumbling, and that's only to make place for new systems, new ways of organizing society. And there's so much going on. If you just care to look around a bit more, I mentioned Evan Laszlo's books, Benjamin Creme's books, my own books. I wrote the book Priorities for a Planet in Transition in 2015. There's so much reason for hope. And again, we have so much help around us, which will be there when the time is there. But we have to do the work. Nobody's going to come and save us. We have to do the work.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank you for being a lighthouse of information, specifically on this subject and on the Ageless Wisdom teaching, which many people I'm sure will look into and want to be interested in, myself included. and for expanding the level of people's, you know, ability to see beyond with your work, your books, and your inner wisdom and inspiration. So thank you very much for joining me today, and nice talking with you.
Thank you very much, Anne, for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yep. Thank you.